The silence in that ballroom was so heavy you could have heard a pin drop on the velvet carpet. I watched the color drain from my daughter Sarah's face, a shade of ghostly white that matched her $5,000 gown as she looked down at the $65,000 invoice in her trembling hands. Her new husband, a boy named Tyler who'd never had a callus on his palms in his entire life, just stared at me with his mouth hanging open like a landed fish. I was the bank. They thought I was the safety net, the quiet old man who would just take the hits, swallow my pride, and keep writing the checks. They were wrong. But to understand why I did what I did and why I don't regret a single second of it, I have to take you back to the beginning. I've spent 40 years building Miller's custom cabinetry. I started in a garage with a circular saw and a dream, and I turned it into the most respected shop in the tri-state area. I didn't do it for the money, not really. I did it for my family. I wanted Sarah to have the things I never had. I wanted her to go to the best schools, live in a safe neighborhood, and never have to worry about where her next meal was coming from. When her mother, Diane, decided she wanted a different kind of life 10 years ago and ran off with a guy named Mark, a smooth-talking real estate developer with capped teeth and a leased Porsche, I didn't fight her for the sake of being petty. I gave her the house. I gave her a generous settlement. I just wanted to make sure Sarah was taken care of. For a while, things were okay, but then Mark started getting into Sarah's head. He had vision. He had flair. He wasn't like me, a man who came home smelling of sawdust and wood glue. Mark took him to the Maldives. Mark took him to Aspen. I was the one paying for the Ivy League tuition and the health insurance, but Mark was the one taking the selfies with her in front of private jets he didn't even own. I stayed quiet. I figured, she's young. She'll see through the flash eventually. That was my first mistake. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, but the first real crack appeared last Thanksgiving. I'd invited Sarah and her fiancé, Tyler, over to my place. I'd spent all day smoking a turkey and making her grandmother's stuffing. Halfway through the meal, Tyler, a kid who thinks hard work is responding to emails on a Saturday, decided to give me some business advice. He told me my shop was quaint, but that I was missing out on the scalability of mass-market offshore manufacturing. He basically told me my life's work was obsolete. I looked at Sarah, expecting her to defend me, or at least roll her eyes. Instead, she patted Tyler's hand and said, "He's right, Dad. Mark says you're trapped in a blue-collar mindset. You should really listen to people who understand the modern market." That stung. But if that was all, I probably would have let it go. I'm a big man. I can handle a little disrespect from a kid who doesn't know a dovetail joint from a hole in the wall. But then came the wedding planning. Sarah wanted the best of everything. The Ashford Estate. It's a venue that looks like something out of a fairy tale, with a price tag to match. The deposit alone was more than I made in my first 3 years of business. I didn't blink. I told her, "Honey, you're my only daughter. If this is what you want, I'll make it happen." I wrote the check for the $65,000 venue and catering fee without a second thought. I thought it was my way of showing her that no matter how much Mark flashed his cash, I was the one who truly had her back. And that's when I realized they didn't see me as their father. They saw me as a bank account with a pulse.
3 months before the wedding, Sarah asked to meet me for lunch. I thought we were going to talk about the guest list or the music. Instead, she slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the table. I opened it and saw the formal invitation. It was beautiful, embossed in gold. But as I read the lines, my heart physically cramped in my chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Mark Sullivan cordially invite you to the wedding of their daughter, Sarah Miller." I looked up at her, confused. "Mark's daughter? Sarah, I'm your father." She didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She took a sip of her sparkling water and said, "Dad, don't make this weird. Mark has been so involved in the planning. He's the one who helped me pick the theme, the flowers. He just has a better eye for these things. He's more Ashford Estate than you are, if you know what I mean." "I paid for the Ashford Estate, Sarah," I said, my voice low. "And we appreciate that, truly," she replied, her tone dismissive. "But there's more. Mark is going to be walking me down the aisle. He's just more comfortable in a tuxedo, and he knows all the right people who will be there. We've decided to give you a guest invitation. You'll have a seat in the 3rd row. It'll be less pressure for you, honestly. You won't have to worry about speeches or being in the spotlight. You can just enjoy the party." I sat there for a long time, looking at that guest invitation. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not the hot, screaming kind. It was a cold, crystalline clarity. I realized that for years, I had been the foundation they built their lives on, while they treated me like the dirt beneath it. Something in me broke that day, but I didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I just tucked the invitation into my jacket pocket and said, "I see. If that's what you want, Sarah, then that's how it will be." What my daughter didn't know was that I had already talked to the venue manager, a woman named Brenda who I'd gone to high school with. I'd been the one who signed the contract. I'd been the one whose name was on the responsible party line. I spent the next 2 months getting everything in order. I didn't cancel the wedding. I didn't want to be the villain who ruined her day before it even started. No, I wanted them to have exactly what they asked for. They wanted Mark to be the father of the bride. They wanted me to be just a guest. Fine. I would be the best guest they ever had. The day of the wedding arrived. The Ashford estate was draped in white orchids and silk. Mark was swanning around in a bespoke tuxedo, acting like he owned the place, greeting people like he was the one who had spent 40 years in a woodshop to afford this. I arrived late, purposefully. I took my seat in the third row, just like I was told. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle on Mark's arm. I watched him give her away to Tyler. I watched the whole charade, and I didn't shed a single tear. I wasn't a father watching his daughter get married. I was a guest watching a very expensive performance. Then came the reception. The champagne was flowing, the top-shelf stuff I'd specifically requested and paid for. The 4-course meal was served on fine china. Mark stood up to give the first toast. He spoke for 15 minutes about family values and providing the best for those you love. He didn't mention my name once, not once. He talked about how we wanted Sarah to have a day she'd never forget. The room cheered. Sarah beamed at him like he was a hero. That was the moment. The open loop was about to close. I stood up. I didn't wait for an introduction. I walked toward the head table. I could see Sarah's face tighten. She was probably afraid I was going to make a scene or an embarrassing drunken speech. I reached into my tuxedo pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes.
"I'd like to say a few words," I said into the microphone. The room went quiet. "I've been told all my life that a father's job is to provide, to build something that lasts. And for 28 years, I thought I was doing that for my daughter. But today, I realized I was mistaken. As Sarah told me herself, I'm not the father of the bride today. I'm just a guest." I turned to Mark. And since Mark here is the one who has provided so much of the vision and flair for this event, and since his name is the one on the invitation as the host, I realized it would be an insult for me to keep taking the credit. I handed the first envelope to Sarah. She opened it, thinking it was a check for a wedding gift. Her face went from confused to horrified in 3 seconds. It was the itemized bill from the Ashford estate, marked pending transfer. "That's the $65,000 for the venue, the catering, and the decor," I said, my voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. "I've already spoken to the management. Since I'm just a guest, I've had my name removed from the contract. Mark, since you're the host, the venue is expecting the final payment from you by the end of the night. I'm sure a man of your vision has that kind of liquidity." The silence was deafening. Mark's smug grin evaporated. He looked like he'd been slapped. He knew, and I knew, that his wealth was mostly smoke and mirrors, lines of credit and leased assets. $65,000 in cash was something he didn't have just sitting around. But I wasn't done. I turned to the head waiter who was standing nearby with a tray of vintage champagne. "And to the staff," I said, "the tab is officially closed. If anyone wants another drink, I believe the host will be opening a cash bar." The room erupted into whispers. I looked at Sarah. She was crying now, but not the happy kind of tears. "Dad, how could you do this?" she hissed. "You're ruining my wedding." "I'm not ruining anything, Sarah," I said, leaning in so only she could hear. "I'm just playing the part you gave me. A guest doesn't pay for the party. A guest just enjoys it. And I've enjoyed this very much." I handed the second envelope to Tyler. "That's a copy of the prenuptial agreement your lawyer sent over last month, the one that said I have no claim to any future family assets." I signed it. I also updated my will this morning.
Since I'm not really family anymore, I wouldn't want to burden you with my blue-collar inheritance. I've left the business and the properties to a scholarship fund for trade school students, people who actually know how to build things. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of that ballroom. I could hear Diane screaming at Mark, and Mark shouting at the venue manager, and Tyler trying to explain to his parents why the bar was closing. It was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. I walked out to the parking lot, got into my truck, and rolled down the windows. The night air was cool and smelled of pine. For the first time in a decade, my chest didn't feel tight. I'd spent my whole life being a provider, a protector, and a silent partner in my own family's life. I'd let them walk all over me because I thought that's what love was. But standing up for myself? That was the real gift. The fallout was predictable. Sarah tried to call me 50 times the next day. Mark's lawyers sent a letter that I threw straight into the shredder. They had to take out a high-interest personal loan to settle the bill with the Ashford estate, and from what I hear, the marriage is already on the rocks because Tyler's family is embarrassed by the scandal.
As for me, I'm back in the shop. I'm working on a set of walnut cabinets for a client who actually appreciates the craft. My phone stays on silent most of the time. Sarah sends an email every now and then, talking about forgiveness and moving forward. I haven't replied yet. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But it's funny. Now that the bank is closed, they seem much more interested in having a father. I think I'll let them wait. I've got a lot of wood to sand, and for the first time in my life, I'm finally enjoying the quiet.